Higa kayo dito, te.
Sa'yo ngayon.
Meow.
Spain. What began as a few squabbling kingdoms lived under the constant threat of destruction at the hands of the mighty caliphates of the south would not only unite and overthrow their old masters, but use the energy and ambition accrued during the process known as the Reconquista to set off to new lands, building a mighty empire far larger than those which had ever ruled over them. Spain in the 16th century was the most powerful country in the world, and the first true global power. By the end of the century, the Spanish ruled many territories outside of Iberia, such as southern Italy and modern Belgium, far-off lands such as the Philippines, and, perhaps most impressively, a great swath of territory in the Americas, extending from the modern southwestern United States to the ends of South America. Spain's great impact on the world is still easily visible today, with things such as the Spanish language, which is spoken by more people overall than even English, and with the Spaniards' preferred variety of Christianity, Catholicism, which remains the most widespread Christian branch thanks in large part to their efforts. For a time it seemed as if Spain was destined to rule the whole world, yet its glory days were limited. The other powers of Europe were keenly interested in catching up in the empire-building. Not only would they do so, but they would eventually surpass the Spanish. Spain entered into a slow decline in the late 17th century, and by the 19th, the very existence of the empire, and indeed the existence of Spain itself, came under threat. This is the story of the Spanish Empire. Ladies and gentlemen, I know many of you have been waiting for this for months, and today I'm proud to say hello and welcome to Fire of Learning. Thank you for joining us in our History of Nations and Peoples documentary series as we explore Spain. The last video, which primarily covered Spanish medieval history, is not necessary to watch to follow this episode, but I would recommend it if you enjoy this. Quickly before we begin, I'd like to thank Carrie John Graham, Caleb Brock, Daniel Atwater, Thomas, Raven Hawk, Hope, Malaya, Mario Rodriguez, Ken, Georgi Toledo, HZ or Hertz, Spencer C., Eric Zambudo, Jeremy Justino, Plant Lawyer, Mark Taylor, Spencer C., Brandon Romano, and Sarah Ralph for being our most recent supporters on Patreon. They join these supporters who help make these videos possible. Now then, mis amigos, let's get to it. The year is 1406. The King of Castile and Leon, Henry III, has died, leaving the throne to his one-year-old son, who has now become Juan, or John II. For 700 years, Iberia had been under at least partial control of Islamic rulers. Now, Castile, along with its two main neighbors, Portugal and Aragon, have driven Islamic rule to one final state, clinging to the south of the peninsula called the Emirate of Granada. The Crown of Castile is the most powerful player in the region, but the Crown of Aragon and Kingdom of Portugal are proving to be formidable rivals. Furthermore, the Muslims, who rest comfortably in Granada behind natural and artificial defenses, have been known to make impressive comebacks. John II had a long but not particularly impressive reign. He was hedonistic, weak-willed, and disinterested, often leaving important decisions, namely the maintenance of the wars with his Christian and Muslim neighbors, to his Portuguese second wife and his trusted advisor, Alvaro de Luca. John II died in 1454 at the age of 49. The throne passed to his son from his first marriage, Enrique, or Henry IV. Fearing a threat to his power, Henry quickly sent his stepmother and her two children, Alfonso and Isabella, to the castle of Arevalo, where they lived in near poverty until the birth of his daughter. With her birth, he welcomed them back to his domain. Henry would spend his reign much like his father's, in conflict with his neighbors, except for Portugal, with whom he had established an alliance by marriage, but also conflict with his own nobles. The Civil War broke out between aristocrats competing for power, in which Henry found his formerly exiled half-brother Alfonso on the opposite side. In 1464, this rebellious league of nobles demanded that Henry make Alfonso, over whom he had considerable influence, heir to the throne, rather than his daughter, Joanna. Ultimately, Henry refused, reigniting civil war. In 1468, the rebellion seemed to waver as their candidate, the young Prince Alfonso, died of plague. However, the rebels maintained their efforts in favor of Alfonso's sister, Isabella. As Henry's power waned with the rebel advances, he agreed to name Isabella his heir. When he died in 1474, however, both Isabella and his daughter Joanna claimed the throne, sparking the War of Castilian Succession. The war soon turned into a broader conflict as Joanna received the support of her husband, the King of Portugal, and his French allies. Isabella, who had married the heir to the Aragonese throne, Ferdinand, naturally received the support of Aragon. In 1476, the two sides met at the Battle of Tora. This battle had no clear immediate victor, however, Ferdinand of Aragon quickly claimed the victory. When word spread of his victory, the nobles across Castile began to favor Isabella. Joanna soon found her support diminished in Castile, and Isabella found herself more secure in her aim to become queen. However, it was not over yet. This war is notable as it highlighted disputes arising in more distant lands. Both countries had been taking interest in the lands beyond their own shores, with Castile, for example, slowly conquering the Canary Islands throughout the century. The naval Battle of Guinea took place in 1478 off the coast of West Africa, where the Portuguese and Castilians had become interested in acquiring gold and slaves. The battle ended in a crushing Portuguese victory, ousting the Castilians from the region altogether. The war ended the following year. When the Treaty of Toledo was signed in 1479, Isabella was recognized as Queen of Castile, and Portugal was essentially granted the right to all the lands south of the Canary Islands. Though Isabella had become secure in her position as monarch, Portugal had clearly come out with a better deal. Castile and Aragon had won the land war, but Portugal ruled the waves, and thus controlled access to the greatest opportunities for expansion. Some months prior, Fernando, or Ferdinand II, Isabella's husband, had become King of Aragon. Both Isabella and Ferdinand were intelligent, capable, ambitious, and dutiful rulers, who would turn out to be some of the most important monarchs in Spanish history. Though jointly ruling the lands which were united only by personal union for the time being, the union of the crowns of Castile and Aragon would pave the way for a single country at the time, Spain. Their domain now included much of Iberia, apart from Navarre, Portugal, and Granada, but also part of Italy, as Ferdinand's predecessors had assumed control of Sardinia and Sicily over a century prior. The Catholic monarchs, as they would come to be called by the Pope, would seek to expand this domain ever further. In 1482, they launched an assault on the Muslim emirate of Granada. Though weak and divided, the region was difficult to access and subdue. The war would last for 10 long years, but in January of 1492, Granada surrendered and was ended. This was the last fight of the Reconquista. After about 780 years, the Iberian Peninsula was once more fully under Christian rule. As Muslim forces had conquered the age-old Christian city of Constantinople over 4 decades prior, the success of the Reconquista on the other side of the Mediterranean was hailed across Christendom as a great victory. The Muslims of Granada who remained after the war was over were allowed to continue to practice their religion. The Catholic monarchs assumed that experiencing life in Christian society would be enough to make them realize that Christianity was the true religion. As many Muslims did not convert, however, this tolerance was not guaranteed for long, and the Muslims would react strongly to the loss of it. The reign of Isabella and Ferdinand was a moment of great accomplishment for Spain. Alongside these accomplishments, Isabella and Ferdinand created a police force, filled the treasury, equipped their military with new technology, and improved the bureaucracy. All of this was necessary for Spain to be the burgeoning power it was becoming. However, they weren't content to stop there. As Granada was defeated, Ferdinand and Isabella would set in motion the events for which they are best remembered.
Rugged and capable, comfortable and clever, the next generation Everest is designed for adventure and engineered for comfort. Now, here's everything you need to know about the next gen Everest in less than 4 minutes. Next gen Everest boasts a modern and bold new exterior design that showcases the vehicle's inherent capability. A wider track and longer wheelbase have not only improved the stance of the next-gen Everest, but also its ride and handling, making it more fun to drive on and off-road. Seat-clamp daytime running lights and new matrix LED headlamps with glare-free high beam, dynamic bending, and more give you better visibility at night and won't dazzle other roads. LED tail lamps with a full-width graphic give Everest a modern and premium look. They also hint at the wider lift. A range of premium petrol and diesel powertrains will be available for the next-gen Everest, including a powerful 3-liter turbo diesel V6. The 360-degree camera offers a split-view display to help with parking in tight spaces. Whether you're driving on or off-road, the next-gen Everest has a drive mode to suit every situation. They are normal, eco, slippery, tow haul, and sand and mud roads. They adjust everything from gear shift, ABS calibration, throttle response, traction control, and more. Next-gen Everest comes with a specific tow haul mode which holds gears longer when climbing. It also comes with an optional integrated trailer brake controller. Customize the instrument cluster to show the information that matters the most, including turn-by-turn navigation. A new front camera view helps you pick a path off-road, and a dedicated off-road screen shows driveline and diff lock, steering angle, and much more. Engineered for adventure, the next-gen Everest will help you explore the road less traveled, even if that means you've got to get its wheel. Don't like parking? Well, that's no problem. Next-gen Everest's enhanced automatic parking functionality allows it to handle the steering, acceleration, and braking, and it even can drive itself out of a tight space too. Ford's latest generation infotainment system is now smarter and more responsive to your voice. Has all the information you need right at your fingertips and boasts wireless smartphone connectivity. Ambient lighting complements the premium finishes inside the next-gen Everest, bathing the interior with a beautiful glow. Everests that are fitted with a moonroof now have more headroom than ever before, thanks to improvements in interior packaging, which have also added more elbow and legroom in the front and back.
When the Christian city of Constantinople fell to the Islamic Ottoman Empire in 1453, it became more difficult for European merchants to access the Silk Road and acquire the riches of Asia. Recently, the Portuguese had sailed around Africa to bypass this obstacle, establishing a new route to Asia. But one man had a different idea. He believed that he could reach Asia by traveling west across the Atlantic. His name was Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus is, simply put, a bit of a controversial historical figure. There hardly seems to be a noteworthy aspect of his life which isn't debated by historians. For the time being, let's focus on the essential points and save the broader discussion for a later video. Columbus had been traveling across Europe, speaking to his rulers about this idea. Isabella and Ferdinand met him and rejected him at first in 1486, but encouraged him to remain in Spain to prevent him from sharing his idea with anyone else. In 1492, seeking to gain an edge after losing great opportunities for expansion to Portugal, they were ready to consider it again. Columbus and his crew left the Canary Islands on September 6th of that year, and traveling west on October 12th, they sighted land. He believed that he had reached the east, not India per se, but a new region of the Indies, calling the inhabitants Indians. He seems to have thought this for the rest of his life, despite others calling it into question. However, as all of us who live here know, these were the Americas. He would explore the area for the rest of the year, claiming lands for Castile as he did so, founded the first attempted settlement on the island of Hispaniola, La Navidad, which was later destroyed by natives, and returned to Spain in March. Word of Columbus's discovery spread like wildfire throughout Europe. The Norse had reached America centuries prior, but this had largely been forgotten and unknown to the world. Castile jumped at the opportunity to expand the region. Columbus was made governor of these lands, though his position would later be stripped from him as a consequence of brutality and misadministration of the colony. The Spanish expansion into the New World was to be primarily motivated by, as the famous saying goes, God, gold, and glory. Alongside the colonization of these lands came the Christianization of the Native Americans, which would, over time, prove very successful. But by which were they motivated the most? Well, I believe that Stanley G. Payne put it quite well in his book, A History of Spain and Portugal, when he said, quote, "For centuries, the expansion of the faith was inextricably intertwined with military glory and economic profit. Because of this, it is idle to ask, as is frequently done, whether the Portuguese pioneers and Castilian conquistadors were motivated more by greed or by religious zeal. In the Hispanic crusading expansionist ideology, the two went together. In Castile in particular, wealth was based on conquest and dominion, which in turn was the result of the expansion of Christendom against the Muslims. It was accepted by most as axiomatic that God made such wealth available because the expansionists were engaged in a righteous cause." End quote. Claiming these lands would not all be so simple, however. The Portuguese believed their Castilian rivals had broken the Treaty of Zaragoza, which forbade Castilian and Aragonese settlement south of the Canary Islands. Technically, much of the Caribbean, including Hispaniola, is south of the Canary Islands, but the Catholic monarchs were not seriously about the boat. When Portugal threatened war, something had to be done. In 1494, the two nations renegotiated, and with the support of the Aragonese Pope, signed the famous Treaty of Tortillas. Despite not knowing what exactly was to be found in the New World, the treaty divided up the new lands between the two powers. The Treaty of Tortillas allowed Castile to conquer the area west of this line, in essence, most of the Americas, with the exception of what became Brazil. Portugal was granted the east outside of Europe. The later treaty, the Treaty of Zaragoza in 1529, defined the eastern boundary for the purpose of expansion into Asia, once it was certain that the Americas were a totally separate place. For the most part, Spain and Portugal would respect each other's American boundaries. The first permanent European settlement in the Americas was that of Santo Domingo on Hispaniola, which remains the oldest continuously inhabited European settlement in the Americas to this day. From there, the Spanish would expand into the Caribbean and in 1510, the American mainland. As all of this was occurring at home, Ferdinand and Isabella were attempting to lead their countries toward greater unity. To many, including these pious monarchs, this meant religious unity. What can I say except that nobody expects to... Oh, I suppose in this case we were expecting it, weren't you? Anyway, the Spanish Inquisition was split off from the Roman Inquisition in 1470. It would last technically until 1834. The primary goal of the Spanish Inquisition at this time was to enforce religious orthodoxy, not so much by targeting overt non-Christians, but rather by identifying and punishing false converts, as well as Catholics who strayed from the laws of the Church. On March 31st of that year came the Alhambra Decree. This ordered the expulsion of the Jews from Spain if they refused to convert to Catholicism. The concern was that they would encourage converts, called conversos, to return to practicing Judaism. For a time, Jews and Muslims had existed in Catholic Spain, as Iberian Catholics and Jews had for much of the time been all on the loose. They were discriminated against, but in most circumstances were tolerated and had numerous opportunities in society. However, that tolerance was beginning to wane. Of the estimated 80,000 Jews in Spain at the time of the decree, about half had reached convert and the other half left. The latter giving rise to the group known as the Sephardi. In 1502, the Muslims in Spain were put in circulation as Queen Isabella ordered her Muslim subjects
Mami, naghanap sa inyo!
relieved. Many did choose to convert, but many conversions were not very genuine, as a substantial number continued to practice Islam in private. It was these false converts of both Islam and Judaism that the Inquisition targeted. Muslims remained tolerated in Aragon for the next few decades. The cruelty of the Inquisition has often been exaggerated by Protestant writers in the nations of Spain's later rivals, whose witch hunt equivalents were often much bloodier. Modern estimates hold that the Spanish Inquisition was responsible for around 4,000 deaths within a 350-year period. However, again, the Inquisition was only one aspect of the wider religious conflict. Isabella died in 1504, leaving Ferdinand around, although he was not the true heir. Rather, their daughter Joanna was. Joanna's husband briefly took over and ruled as King Philip I of Castile in 1506, but died within a few months. Ferdinand then aggressively ruling the region. The Catholic monarchs had taken the Moroccan city of Melilla for themselves in 1497. Now, Ferdinand would continue taking a few more North African cities over the rest of his reign. In 1504, he conquered Naples, or southern Italy, during the Italian Wars. In 1512, he conquered the kingdom of Naval in the name of the crown of Castile, effectively uniting all the territories that belonged to modern-day Spain. He died in 1560, ending one of the most eventful periods in Spanish history. Both kingdoms were then nominally left to Ferdinand and Isabella's daughter, Joanna. However, Juana la Loca, meaning Joanna the Mad, was said to be too mentally unstable to rule and had already been sent to a convent after the death of her husband pushed her over the edge. Thus, power went to Ferdinand's grandson, Charles. Castile and Aragon would technically not be legally united into a single country, Spain, until the early 1700s. However, it was around this time that it began to be referred to as Spain, or at times the Spains, given its small components. Thus, it will be referred to as Spain throughout the rest of this presentation, unless distinction is necessary. Charles I was the son of Philip the Fair of the House of Habsburg. The Habsburgs, centered in Austria, then a part of the Holy Roman Empire, were one of Europe's most important royal families. The branch, which now formed in Spain, would lead the empire towards greater success. The reign of Carlos I of Spain, remembered in history as Charles V, was another very eventful and complicated one. Charles was already lord of the Netherlands in 1560, when he became the king of Spain and all its possessions. 3 years later, he was elected Holy Roman Emperor. The Holy Roman Empire, by this point, was quite a centralized state, essentially meaning he did not have absolute command over the region of the empire. But, as Archduke of Austria, he ruled the most important one, which increased his power. Thus, his dominion included Spain, the Low Countries, Europe, much of Italy, and a growing domain in the Americas. Emperor and King Charles was now doubtlessly the most powerful man in the world. The Spanish, still getting used to the idea of working with each other, were not exactly thrilled from a foreigner who could not even speak Spanish turn out to be their king. Charles would learn Castilian Spanish, and even some Basque, and spent about 6,500 days of his life in Spain, second only to the Low Countries. But there was always to be distrust and hostility. Charles would soon face serious domestic conflicts as a result. The revolt of the Comuneros and conflict in Navarre. Both were suppressed. Charles quickly became a rival of the French, whose kingdom was entirely circled. In 1521, war broke out between France and the Habsburg Empire. The first of a number of Franco-Habsburg wars that would plague the continent throughout Charles' reign. It was in this war, largely fought in Italy, that the Duchy of Milan was ceded to the Habsburgs. War broke out again in 1526, in which France and its allies, the Pope's walk to Rome was sacked by Charles' army. The papacy learned then not to cross France, which would be important when the Pope decided to forbid England's King Henry VIII from divorcing his wife, who was Charles' aunt, Catherine of Aragon. This would take the English down a route that Charles was attempting to prevent his German subjects from taking, a Protestant Reformation. While the Reformation would trouble Charles for the rest of his reign, compared to Northern Europe, Protestantism made little progress in Spain itself. The Inquisition was too strong, the monarchy was disinterested, and the people were disinterested. All of this was a product of the fact that the Reconquista had caused Catholicism's roots to grow quite deeply in Spain. Another of Charles's many great rivals were the Turks, whom he fought as Holy Roman Emperor, but also as King of Spain over influence in the Mediterranean and North Africa. War with the Turks and the French was nothing new to the Spanish, but not all of Charles's wars were acceptable to his subjects. Many were not fond of Spanish silver being spent and Spanish blood being spilled on broader Habsburg interests that didn't concern Spain itself. When Charles settled and made peace with the driven Protestants southward, it made the Spanish even more unhappy. If they were to be involved in these wars, they would see Catholicism triumph. Spain was